Previously in the complete creation.
This is not what they found at the site. So I took the liberty of correcting Mickelson's drawing by simply drawing the sediments as the tidal flats that they are. The drawing is now more scientifically accurate in depicting the find and the site. As a result, the interpretation becomes obvious. The dinosaur didn't wade out into deeper water. The dinosaur was walking on soft mud, apparently with little to no water on top. In the time that it took the dinosaur to walk a few steps, the water rose deep enough that the dinosaur was forced to swim. Welcome back. Thanks for joining me again for the next part of this journey. We left off exploring a strange geological phenomena called a planation surface. The cliffs of Joggins, Nova Scotia, provides the best example in the world of the contrast between long and slow geological processes and the unusual planation surface phenomenon, which is obviously not the result of long and slow geological processes, because we can actually see the difference. The tilted rock layers on the beaches are eroded in differential erosion by long and slow geological processes, whereas the very same rock layers are cut off flat at the top of the cliffs with no visible differential erosion. Why is that? What on earth happened here? Really, the only possibility is water in some form, either free-flowing water or ice like glaciers. Now, glaciers from the Ice Age are actually the favored theory, though there are so many problems with that theory that it's difficult to name them all. For example, the sediments that were planed off. Where did all those sediments go? If glaciers made this cut, then the glaciers would have had to have moved probably hundreds of kilometers here, thousands of kilometers at planation surfaces elsewhere. Nobody believes glaciers move hundreds or thousands of kilometers. Furthermore, glaciers don't cut flat surfaces. They cut gouges and leave behind glacial till and moraines. Evidence that they were there. Furthermore, glaciers, by definition, move downhill by gravity. There is no downhill for these gigantic planation surfaces. By definition, a planation surface was originally made flat and level. So that leaves us with water as the culprit that cut these planation surfaces. Now, fast-moving water with sand suspended in it can act like liquid sandpaper and can perform incredibly fast carving of any rock, no matter the rock hardness. Let's head out to Western Canada. Here we are standing on top of the Hand Hills in Alberta. Now, it's a small hill that's been planed flat. Southeast of here, on the border of Saskatchewan and Alberta, there is the Cypress Hills. Stand on top and turn around 360 degrees to admire how beautifully flat it has also been planed. Both are planed flat across the top about 4,500 feet above sea level. Further southeast of there, you will find the Flaxville Plateaus of Montana, also planed flat. These were all probably the same surface, with the land in between these hills now scoured away by massive erosion. The hills are capped with what most would call river rocks. They're rounded by water, and I agree. Except these rocks tell a unique story. First, They're composed of a rock called quartzite, which is a really hard, tough stone that was made up of sand fused together under extreme heat and pressure. It's really hard. But when you go to visit Cypress Hills, Highway 41 goes up and over the park, and the rock cut exposes this thick cap of rounded quartzite boulders. Stop and take a really close look at the rocks. They have these strange circular marks. They're peppered with them. Multiple geologists and researchers, both creationary and adherents to conventional deep-time geology, have come to the same conclusion. These marks were produced by the quartzites being hammered against each other. Hold up. Some of these rocks are quite large. And glaciers sure aren't going to hammer these rocks together, and they've been hammered together a lot. In order to make those hammer marks, the rocks have to have a minimum velocity to strike each other and create those hammer marks. Gently rubbing them together or even compressing them under tremendous force does not produce these hammer marks. Compressing the rocks together can create marks on the rocks, and you do find such marks amongst some of the quartzites, but it's a mark, not a fracture. Only one rock moving at high velocity relative to another and striking it creates these circular percussion fractures. So what process would pick up billions of these rocks, hammer them together at high velocity? Well, I'll tell you right now, it sure ain't no slow and low geological process, that's for sure. But incredibly fast-moving deep water is the only thing that could do this. Water deep enough and fast enough to pick up these boulders, which sometimes weigh tens of kilograms. Now, geologists have charts they can reference for rock size and density and the velocity of water needed to lift, well, pebbles. These quartzite boulders are so large, the numbers are literally off the charts, and so the calculations must be extrapolated. But we can estimate the minimum depth and speed. It works to a minimum of water 55 meters deep, about 180 feet, moving at least 30 meters per second, about 110 kilometers an hour or 70 miles an hour. Stop and think about that for a second. That's the highway speed out in Western Canada. So when you drive out to the Cypress Hills to investigate this for yourself, you are going to do that, right? After all, you believe in true science and scientific investigation, right? Well, when you drive out there, and as you're driving along the highways, envision water moving at the same speed as you, picking up these boulders, weighing tens of kilograms, hammering them against each other as it drags them across the countryside. There is no present-day processes like that today, is there? The present cannot be the key to the past, but my Bible talks about a time when all the continents were underwater, so the Bible can certainly be the key to the past, but it gets better. When you go to the Cypress Hills to scope out the joint, pay close attention to the boulder size. As the water transporting the rocks gets slower, it is no longer moving fast enough to carry the big rocks. So the big rocks drop out of the flow first, while the water still has enough velocity to carry the smaller rocks. As the water slows down more and more, eventually all the rocks drop out. So with that in mind, we can stand where the smallest boulders are and face towards the largest boulders, and we can now deduce what direction from where the rocks came. Well, it turns out it's in a southwest direction. So here's Cypress Hills today. So if we start walking in that direction, looking for the source for these quartzite boulders, you'll walk over 1,000 kilometers before you find an outcrop of identical quartzite. you'll find yourself in Idaho. Now, that's the nearest outcrop of this quartzite. So let's assume the boulders came from the nearest and not the farthest, which is, well, farther still. So, from the evidence at hand, we can draw a couple of conclusions. A huge, provincially sized sheet of water, at least 55 meters or 180 feet deep, moving at highway speeds, a minimum of 70 miles an hour or 110 kilometers an hour, ripped up rocks in Idaho, transporting them over 1,000 kilometers, planing off mountaintops in Alberta and depositing these quartzite boulders. But notice, there's this really annoying mountain range called the Rockies, right in between the original point of the rocks and the destination in Alberta where those rocks were dropped off. So you got two choices. Either the water went up and over the mountains at highway speeds, carrying huge boulders over 1,000 kilometers, or the Rocky Mountains had not yet risen up. So I would contend that sometime in the past, before the Rocky Mountains had risen, and by deduction, before any of the other major mountain ranges on planet Earth rose up, because it would appear that all the major mountain ranges rose up at the same time, before all of that, all of the continents were underwater. The Hand Hills in Alberta, the Cypress Hills of Alberta and Saskatchewan, and the Flaxville Plateaus of Montana were in all likelihood one planation surface which was cut up by further erosion after its formation. The problem is that planation surface would have been at least 500 kilometers wide. So what would you call it if you had a sheet of water 55 meters deep, 500 kilometers wide, moving at 110 kilometers an hour, 1,500 meters above sea level, going across northwestern United States and southwestern Canada? Well, first things first, I think I would call that a catastrophe of global proportions. And because it involves a lot of water, that would be a global flood. Am I right? Creationary scientist Dr. John Baumgartner was the developer of the highly respected 3D spherical geophysical computer simulation system called Terra. This simulation system is multi-purpose. Originally designed for modeling dynamics of planetary mantles, with his techniques used in the Terra program, Dr. Baumgartner and Dr. Daniel Barnett presented a paper in the 1994 Third International Conference on Creationism. They were modeling the dynamics of the oceans on Earth if all of the continents were submerged, and because he leans towards the conventional Pangea model of the original supercontinent, they were specifically trying to model the currents in what is called the Tethys Sea. Now, what they discovered quite by accident was that whenever the continents were underwater in the computer models, the oceans would break down into gigantic Coriolis currents caused by the rotation of the Earth. It was for the same reason and in the same form that hurricanes currently rotate counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere and clockwise in the southern hemisphere. Now, right now, the oceans do fall into these currents, but the land effectively stops the currents from building up. This is what makes our ocean currents like the Gulf Stream. They are relegated in speed and location by the position of the continents boxing them in. As Doctors Baumgartner and Barnett discovered by accident, the moment the continents become submerged, you would get gigantic vortices forming in shallower waters, with the computer modeling showing speeds of 40 to 80 meters per second. That's 144 kilometers an hour or 90 miles an hour to as much as 288 kilometers an hour or 179 miles an hour. Now, this is just a computer model, so the numbers may be off, But the surprise deductions are actually logical when you think about it. You can get these huge gyres of water forming in shallower waters. Now, as the land starts to rise out of the floodwaters, you get a combination of high currents forming as the water leaves the land. Picture a plate in your kitchen sink and pull it up flat out of the water. The water runs off and can pick up some pretty good speeds. It's the same with the continents rising up out of the floodwaters. Only now on top of that, Coriolis currents can ramp up water speeds to tens of meters per second, far above cavitation speed, where the fast-moving waters can both erode rocks and rip up layers of rock like the quartzites in Idaho. It rips them up and transports them. It rounds and pummels the rocks against each other, cutting planation surfaces across the countryside. But I did say we find planation surfaces all over the world. They are found on every continent. Why? Because every continent was underwater at the same time. It was a global flood. Yes, even Antarctica. These planation surfaces have been traced under the ice by radar, and in some places the planed mountaintops peek out from underneath the ice. Ollier and Payne discuss planation surfaces in great length in their book. They provide multiple examples of planation surfaces they believe were planed off flat at lower elevations and then raised to higher elevations, sometimes raised thousands of meters to their current elevation. So this can, tilt planation surfaces out of level, or warp them, or break apart the surface into smaller sections, which subsequently get elevated to different heights, like in the Beartooth Mountains of Montana. Now, my good friend Mike Ward took these pictures, and you can see them in his excellent book, Flood by Design, where he writes on the copious amounts of flood evidence. Mike was actually the one who inspired me to investigate planation surfaces, and that research I'll be sharing with you now. Here, even thousands of feet below the planation surface, you can see that these hard granite mountains have been planed incredibly flat and at tremendous altitude. Just how high did those floodwaters get? I don't think they got that high. I think Ollier and Payne are correct in their deduction for this spot at least. I think those planation surfaces were cut at a lower elevation, and then mountain building occurred, breaking up that planation surface into sections and raising them up to varying elevations. But let's go back to the east coast of Canada again to look at an absolutely gargantuan planation surface that many of you may have seen and not recognized. I published a paper, peer-reviewed paper, on this topic back in 2013 in the Creation Research Society Quarterly, so you can read the dry and boring details there if you'd like. I'll give you a synopsis. Because I was unable to find a name for this geographic feature, I named it the Newfoundland Planation Surface after the island on which it is centrally located. So basically, the entire east coast of Canada has experienced a massive planation event covering Nova Scotia, Cape Breton, Newfoundland, right up into Quebec and Labrador. I chased this planation surface for some 2,000 kilometers, climbing many, many mountains. Presumably, the planation surface at Joggins was originally part of this regionally sized planation surface, but because of the buckling and distorting of the planation at the Cobequid Highlands, I'll exclude the Joggins area. So you can go and see this amazing planation surface for yourself. And in fact, if you visited Cape Breton Highlands or climbed Grossmorn Mountain in Grossmorn National Park, you've already seen it. and perhaps didn't even realize it. All of the mountains, starting here, all across Cape Breton, across the western shores of Newfoundland, and quite a ways inland, even to the mountains called the Gaff Topsails, all through Gros Morne National Park, across the Bell Strait into Quebec, and even way up into Labrador. You actually drive across this planed surface on part of the Trans-Labrador Highway. All of the mountains have been planed off level with each other. There is an ever so slight bulge to the surface, with the steepest part being from here to the topsails, where the planed surface slopes downhill at a whopping 0.15 degrees. But enough talk, let's take a tour of this surface so you can see it for yourself. It is visible quite a ways inland in Nova Scotia, but the most prominent place you begin to see it is in the Cape Breton Highlands. You actually drive up on the planation surface, but you can't really see it because of the trees. If you get over to a place called Sugarloaf Mountain, as far as the eye can see, yes, there are mountains, but the moment the mountain hits a certain height, it's planed off flat. They all are. If you turn around and look towards Newfoundland, that mountain is planed off just as flat and at the same elevation as the others. Let's take the ferry across that water over to the island of Newfoundland, and immediately you are met with Table Mountains, all planed off at the same height. You can follow these planed mountains now for hundreds of kilometers. Climb the mountains right here, just outside of Port aux Basques. Here we are looking north, head up to Gros Morne National Park, and you can make it out from even lower elevations. Here's my classy 88 fan I fondly refer to as the Chick Magnet, and I'm conducting my studies on that planation surface, clear as day right here. If you can, climb Table Mountain. This was my first attempt, and you can see the mountains all abruptly end at the same elevation, as far as the eye can see. And shortly after I took this picture, I almost killed myself as I fell off the mountain. Later on, when I did make it up on top of the mountain, it was socked in like this. But as far as the eye can see, it's been planed flat. The entire mountain is composed of a rock called peridotite, and it's fairly rare at the surface, so geologists come from all over the world to study this mountain. Head over to Gros Morne Mountain and make the hike up to the top of the plain mountaintop. It's worth it. Once you get up there, stop and pull a complete 360-degree turn. As far as the eye can see, the mountains have all been planed off. Pay close attention to the rocks you're standing on, because there's no gravels, no sand. The only rocks you are standing on are called Felsenmeer. The surface was a cleaned, flat rock, and freeze-thaw cycles over thousands of years have shattered the rock surface into this Felsenmeer. The mountain is composed of a granitic type of rock called gneiss, and part of the mountain is made up of quartzite. You can watch the rock change as you walk the trail over the mountain. So, heading north through Gros Morne National Park, you can follow the planed mountaintops all the way up to Bell Strait. Here's one of the last outcrops you'll see before getting on the ferry to Quebec and Labrador. Most of the planation surface has been eroded away for quite a ways, but driving on the Trans-Labrador Highway, you will eventually get up top and drive across the planed mountaintops. Now, that planed surface, that planation surface gets as high as a little over 800 meters high and is almost flat and level for some 800 kilometers as far as straight as the crow flies. Now, I doubt very much that these mountains rose up after they were planed off, because the flat and level surface surely would have buckled and tilted from any tectonic activity. The fact that the mountaintops didn't even so much as have sand on top of them indicates that it was just good old-fashioned water seeking its own level that planed all the mountains off right where they were. That water was moving so fast that rock hardness made no difference. All rocks were eaten up equally. The hard peridotite of Table Mountain, the softer sedimentary layers up in the northern arm of Newfoundland, and even the hardest rocks like quartzite and granite. Now, I'll use a complicated scientific term here. The water was moving so fast that rock hardness meant diddly squat. Well, if you had a wall of water at least 800 kilometers wide, 800 meters above sea level, moving fast enough to pulverize any rocks across the entire eastern seaboard and plane down all the mountaintops, what would you call that? I would call it a global flood.
Coming up in the next Complete Creation.
Did you know that the top 3,000 feet or so of Mount Everest is covered in fossil clams, buried alive in the closed position? Now, last I checked, clams are lousy mountain climbers, but they beat Sir Edmund Hillary to the top by millennia. In fact, every major mountain range on planet Earth has fossilized sea life contained within its rocks. The Appalachians, the Rockies and Alaskan ranges, the Andes, the Swiss Alps, and yes, even the Himalayas. In fact, that's a key factor geologists use in identifying volcanic mountains, is if it doesn't have fossils.
You can catch the entire series in a variety of ways. You can watch the show online at www.completecreation.org or www.genesisweek.com. You can also purchase the Complete Creation series in full high definition on Blu-ray or video on demand at completecreation.org. Or support the Miracle Channel with a monthly tax-deductible donation and access the entire Complete Creation series in high definition through Corco, Miracle Channel's video on demand service. We need your support to keep this program on the air. So please pray for us. And if you wish to financially support the program, Canadians can make a tax-deductible donation to Core Ottawa, Canada North Post Office Box 72075, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, K2K2P4. Or you can make a donation via PayPal online at ianjuby.org/donations. And thank you for your support.